Sudan and South Sudan video presentation. For the icebreaker, we are giving you a joke. Three roughnecks were working up in the derrick, Cooter, Lonnie, and Donnie. As they start their descent, Cooter slips, falls out of the derrick, and is killed instantly. As the ambulance takes the body away, Lonnie says, "Well, someone should go tell his wife." Donnie says, "Okay, I'm pretty good at sensitive stuff, so I'll do it." 2 hours later, he comes back carrying a case of Budweiser. Lonnie says, "Where'd you get that beer from, Donnie?" "Cooter's wife gave it to me," Lonnie replies. "That's unbelievable. You told the lady that her husband was dead and she gave you beer?" "Well, not exactly," Donnie says. "When she answered the door, I said to her, 'You must be Cooter's widow.' She said, 'You must be mistaken. I'm not a widow.' Then I said, 'I'll bet you a case of Budweiser you are.'" Roughnecks are good at sensitive stuff.
What we will talk about: history of Sudan and South Sudan, production of oil, environmental impact on the environment, and economic impact on Sudan. History. Exploration of oil began around the year 1959 by an Italian oil company, Agate. They were allowed to search for oil around the area surrounding the Red Sea. In 1974, dry gas and gas condensate were found at Basha, Ir, and Sukin wells by Chevron on a little over 100 kilometers southeast from the Port Sudan. Oil production did not really occur until 1990s. The First Civil War was from 1955 to 1972. The second was from 1983 to 2005. The Second Civil War was ended by the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, which set standards for sharing oil revenue at 50-50 split and a timeline toward a referendum on the South's independence. South Sudan gains independence from Sudan in 2011. In March 1997, work began on a 1,540 kilometer oil pipeline to a terminal at Port Sudan on the Red Sea. At the beginning of 1998, contracts were signed worth $1 billion with Chinese, Malaysia, and European suppliers. The pipeline began delivering oil in 1999 when the first 600,000 barrels were loaded into a shell tanker to Port Bashir.
Now I'm going to tell you about the production of oil. Sudan did not start producing oil until the 1990s. Sudan produces the Dar blend, which is heavy sour oil, from the Mugland and Melon basins. At peak production in 2010, Sudan was producing 490,000 barrels per day. Production declined rapidly after July 2011, when South Sudan voted to become an independent nation. Since then, both nations have struggled to produce at the rate they once did. Sudan and South Sudan both have a poor infrastructure for transporting and refining oil. Sudan has some pipelines, whereas South Sudan has little to none. South Sudan is considering constructing pipelines either to the port of Lamu or port of Djibouti on the coast of Kenya and Ethiopia, respectively. Production has declined since 2010 due to the split and civil disputes going on in South Sudan, causing complete shut-ins of oil production. South Sudan needs a pipeline of its own to avoid high transit fees that Sudan charges in an attempt to make up for revenue loss. Sudan and South Sudan do not have a pipeline for natural gas and do not have a local demand for natural gas. So they use other methods for using the natural gas. Sudan and South Sudan both flare the natural gas and in some cases re-inject the natural gas into the well to increase well pressure to help extract oil that is hard to obtain.
talking about Sudan and South Sudan's world impact. Sudan fueled the rise of international oil companies in both China and India. The conflict between Sudan and South Sudan caused China to get involved in Africa's regional conflicts, which they've never done before. They normally just sat back and watched. China really depends on Sudanian oil, and as you see in the chart, China gets about 86% of all of their oil exports. Due to pipeline disputes, a Japanese company has decided to partially fund the alternate pipeline, which is planned to go through Kenya. Prior to South Sudan's succession, Sudan was the second largest producer of oil outside of OPEC. The local effects of oil are also prevalent. While Sudan is dependent on oil, its neighbor South Sudan is deemed the most oil-dependent nation. Not many jobs outside of oil are available. Most are agricultural and they don't even get a salary, they just get food. Many citizens are below the poverty line, and famine is widespread amongst the people. The corrupt government takes most of the income spent on military salaries instead of the development of the country, so they're really struggling.
I'm going to tell you about the environmental effects of oil production in Sudan. Dug pits for waste products tend to leak into the drinking water of the Sudanese people, and the lax enforcement and the few environmental policies in place by the Sudanese government encourage wasteful production by oil companies. The companies often self-regulate and favor profit over sustainability. Road construction throughout Sudan to get to the oil fields is often built very cheaply, and it disrupts the irrigation and the flow of water between the fields that the Sudanese people rely on to grow food. Oftentimes, water could be flooding on one side of a road while another side is experiencing a drought. The oil wastes that are leaked into the environment have been linked to miscarriages, illnesses, and deaths. The economy in Sudan is very reliant on oil. It accounts for 27% of Sudan's budget and 98% of South Sudan's budget in 2010. Most profits from oil go to foreign investors and the Sudanese officials. Local villages are negatively affected by oil refineries, damaging arable lands vital to subsistence farmers. The general population does not receive money from the oil industry, and locals are discriminated against in hiring by oil companies, especially in South Sudan, where the workers normally can only work temporary jobs.
So now let's review on what we've talked about in our presentation. For history, there's been two civil wars, one in 1955 to 1972, and the other was from 1983 to 2005. Oil exploration began in 1959 by the Italian company Agit. Production began in 1990s, and South Sudan gained independence from Sudan in 2011. For production, it was slow to start producing. Country split in July 2011. Peak oil production in 2010, and due to the split, oil production declined rapidly. Many issues inhibiting both countries to produce efficiently and effectively, such as civil disputes and not being able to agree on what the reserves are for each country and how to transport the oil. There's very poor infrastructure for refineries and for transporting the oil through pipelines, and both countries are very wasteful with their natural gas. For environment and economy, irresponsible practices damage the local environment, which hurts people's health and the economy's health. Waste hurts farming lands and reduces available food for the people. And for the world impact, China was forced to get into regional confrontation because of economic ties, and its oil supply was cut short. Japan also is planning on funding an alternate pipeline through Kenya to bypass Sudan hostility. Corruption has caused mismanaged development and widespread famine.